Good morning and welcome back to Proverbs, a letter to my son. This morning we're going to look at Lesson 8. In Lesson 7, we saw the blessings that come from doing good, the first half of Chapter 3. And today we're going to look at the security that comes by not doing evil, and this is the second half of Chapter 3. As you will remember, in Chapter 1 we were told what to do. We had the 4 steps to learning and living the book. We learned about the fear of the Lord that we must acquire and maintain if we are to be successful at living the 4 steps. And then we saw the friends and acquaintances that we must reject if we are to maintain a biblical fear of the Lord. And in the last paragraph of chapter 1, we saw what happens if we reject wisdom. Then in chapter 2 of Proverbs, we saw the type of searches we must engage in order to find the fear of the Lord and discover who God is, what He is, and how He works in the affairs of men. And then in chapter 3, where we are now, it's wisdom with the boots on, how to put wisdom into practice. So we saw the first part, the blessings that come from doing good in Lesson 7. And today, we will look at the security that comes by not doing evil. Now, if you haven't done it yet, please stop and print the form Proverbs 3 Security. You'll find it at my website, www.jlsparaphrase.org. Please print this and have it in front of you as we proceed through this lesson. It will make understanding what we're doing much more clear, and you'll gain a whole lot more from it. Otherwise, you might get lost. So have that on your lap or on your desk as we proceed. Look at your form, and you'll see this is the structure of the chart that you're holding in your hand. We're going to proceed through this chart in the following way. First, we're going to look at the instructions in the center column of your chart, the things that Solomon said don't do. And then we're going to look at God's response to those who obey and to those who disobey. After we look at those 2 columns, then we will tie it all together with the second half of the second paragraph of Proverbs chapter 3. And we're going to attach that second half of the paragraph to this part like we did the first half of paragraph 2, and we attached it to the first part of lesson 7, the blessings that come from doing good. We'll look first at Proverbs chapter 3, verses 27 through 31. That's that center column on your chart. And we'll look first at verses 27 and 28. Verse 27 says, "Withhold not good from them to whom it is due, when it is in the power of thine hand to do it." So what's the verse saying? Don't hold back from people who need your help. Now, this verse is talking primarily about physical help. The next one will talk about financial help. But now, imagine you're going down the street and you see somebody that needs help. Or you're in church and you see somebody that needs physical help. And you want to help. Well, that's fine. But is it in your power to do it? Do you have the means to help them? Well, if you do, then by all means help. If you don't, then you have no responsibility because there's nothing you can do, and don't feel badly about it. But for the one that could help and won't, then we say of them that they're just downright uncaring. And Solomon's saying, don't be there. Remember, we're talking about things that Solomon says don't do. So don't withhold good when you can do it. The person that'll do that is uncaring. Now, the person that needs help won't know that you're aware of their need if you just walk on by. But God will know. Now, in the next verse, in verse 28, say, "Not unto thy neighbor go and come again, and tomorrow I will give it when thou hast it by thee." We're talking here primarily about financial help. But what's the verse saying? Don't say, "Come back tomorrow. I've got it here, but I'm not going to give it to you right now." What kind of person is this? Well, too busy. I don't care. There was a time when Donna and I were traveling across the states from California to a children's home ministry in South Carolina. And we didn't quite have enough money to get there. So we asked a fairly wealthy fellow in church, could we borrow $300 to get to this ministry? And he said, sure. Well, long story short, we got there and that money never came. And quite interesting, the Lord did it for us. We arrived in South Carolina, 2 vehicles pulling 2 trailers with empty fuel tanks and $25 between us. But I am convinced that this man never intended to help us. So a person like this is too busy. Now, the interesting part is the person in need will know, and God will know too. Let's look at James chapter 2, verses 15 to 17. If a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto them, depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding you give them not those things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? Even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. We look at verses 27 and 28, and we can conclude that they adversely affect the community. We'll see how the succeeding verses affect other areas of our life. Now let's look at the next verse, verse 29. And notice as we go, each of the incidences get a little bit worse than the previous one. So, devise not evil against thy neighbor, seeing he dwelleth securely beside thee. Don't feel that you have to get back at someone for a perceived hurt. Notice it says, your neighbor dwelleth securely beside thee. He thinks everything's fine. He's done nothing wrong. But you have this preconceived idea that somehow he has hurt you or caused harm. And you're saying, I'm going to get back at this guy. I'll fix his wagon. And Solomon says, don't do that. What kind of person would do that? Well, someone who is divisive. They're in the background is going to hurt your neighbor. Now, notice, if you do that kind of thing, your neighbor won't know it initially. They will in time. But God knows it. So don't be divisive. Don't come up with some scheme to get back at your neighbor for something you perceived wrong. And verse 30, strive not with a man without cause if he done thee no harm. Notice, strive not if there's no reason to do it. So don't be combative. Don't be arguing. Don't be belittling someone. Notice, though, he says, if he's done thee no harm. This neighbor's innocent. This kind of guy will argue, he'll fight, and that's not what we're supposed to do. But notice, that type of person is contentious. He's just combative. In previous ones, the neighbor won't know, but the neighbor will know here. He'll know it right off, and God will know. So here's the contentious person. Look at James again. James 4, 1 through 3. From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence, even of your lusts that war in your members? Ye lust and have not, ye kill and desire to have and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not because you ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lusts. These 2 verses now, notice the first 2, 27 and 28, adversely affects the community. These 2 now adversely affect the home. Because remember, we're talking about my neighbor, my neighbor. So these are things that Solomon says, don't do. We can do them. Of course, we're in error. But Solomon says, don't do them. So we look at the next verse now. It's a single verse, verse 30. And it says, envy thou not the oppressor, and choose none of his ways. Don't envy the guy that's out there, and he seems to be enjoying life. Things aren't going hard for him. He's doing things you'd like to do. He has things that you'd like to have. You say, well, believers don't envy the wicked. Well, What about Asaph? What about Asaph? Well, we'll look at that in a minute. But he says, envy thou not the oppressor, and choose none of his ways. Don't even go there. I know it's attractive in a sense, but for those who know the Lord and have a biblical fear of the Lord, that's not the place to be. What kind of person would envy the evil man? Well, someone who's internally downright evil. This man's evil, and don't be like him. So in that case, everyone will know, and God will know too. And you might say, well, I'd never do that. I love the Lord. What about Asaph? Here's a godly man, Asaph, similar to David, wrote many of the Psalms. And in Psalm 73, it says, actually Asaph writes, for I was envious at the foolish when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. Oh, he's out here trying to live for the Lord and experiences hardships. And he's saying, these people have it so easy. I wish I was like them. Until, look at verse 17, until I went to the sanctuary of God and I understood their end. What is their end? Disaster, hurts, heartaches, and losses. So don't go there. First two verses adversely affect the community. Verses 28 and 30 adversely affect the home. And verse 31 adversely affects the mind and the heart. Interesting to note, we look at verse 27, the uncaring, and he's unwilling to share his energies. Remember, it's not giving physical help when it's needed. The man that's too busy is unwilling to share his possessions. The divisive person is unwilling to face conflict. The contentious person is unwilling to avoid conflict. And the evil person is unwilling to obey. Notice that each is successively worse than the previous one. And we should not take part in any of these. Remember, Solomon is saying, don't go there, don't do these. So we have looked now at that center column, verses 27 through 31. And now we will look at God's response. Look on the right two columns of your chart. We're going to look at that now, that center column, that left column now is what we just looked at. And to the right is God's response to the disobedient and God's response to the obedient. Notice it says, withhold not good from whom it's due, and don't say to your neighbor, go and come again. Now, verse 32, for the forward is an abomination to the Lord, and his secret is with the righteous. We're talking about someone who's froward. What's that mean? That means perverted. But now, the righteous now, his secret, his blessing is with the righteous. So for those who withhold good, the Lord says they're disobedient. And to the one that's righteous and helps, they're obedient. They're obeying the command. And then we add verse 33, the curse of the Lord's in the house of the wicked, but he blesseth the habitation of the just. Notice there the house and the habitation. We're talking about our neighbor now. The curse of the Lord's on the man who's divisive and contentious with his neighbor. But the Lord's blessing is on the home of the righteous person who is easy to get along with and that doesn't involve in this aspect of being rough on his neighbor. And then verse 34, surely he scorneth the scorners, but he giveth grace to the lowly. Talking about the scorners. They're the ones that envy the wicked and take part in it. But the lowly are the ones that kind of experience the harassment from the evil guy, but are at peace. And the Lord gives grace to those. Now we look at the last two blocks on the bottom. He says, and I'm going to read it as the text says, the wise shall inherit glory, but shame shall be the promotion of fools. But notice, God's response to the disobedient, they're fools. But God's response to the obedient, he calls them wise. Now, the interesting part is, fools inherit dishonor, but the wise inherit honor or glory. So now we have looked at both of the all three of the columns in this chart. That is paragraph 3 of Proverbs chapter 3. Now we're going to look at the second half of the second paragraph of Proverbs 3. That includes verses 19 through 26. So we're going to look first, look on your chart. The upper left block is not one of the security benefits. It's just saying basically, this is good stuff. You're going to like it. Listen carefully now. As we saw in the first part of the chapter, lesson 7, there are blessings that come in abundance for obeying and doing good. And now there's security here by not doing evil. And you'll look at what the security aspects are as we go on. So let's look at verses 19 to 23, starting on that upper left block. And that upper left block says, verses 19 to 22, the Lord by wisdom hath founded the earth, by understanding hath he established the heavens, by his knowledge the depths are broken up, and the clouds drop down with dew. My son, let them not depart from thine eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion. So shall they be life unto thy soul, and grace unto thy neck. Now, I ask you, so many times we read over words and we don't really look at them for what they're telling us. I want to ask you, the word them in verse 21, what's it referring to? Can you see it there in above in verse 19? Well, it's talking about wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. He says, don't let those get away from you, because those are all aspects of wisdom. And I'm sure all of you want to be wise and have wisdom. Now, the other thing is the word they. What's they referring to then? Well, it's referring to sound wisdom and discretion. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, so they will be life unto your soul and grace to your neck. So he's saying, basically, this is good stuff and it's worth it. So let's look down at the block on row 1. So now this is going to be the security aspect that you're going to gain if you don't do these things in the block to the right of each one. So let's look now. We're going to add verse 23 to your chart, and it's going to look like this. Then thou shalt walk in thy way safely, and thy foot shall not stumble. On your chart, verse 23 is just to the left of that center one we looked at, verses 27 and 28. And we're going to add those together now. So it says, you'll walk safely, and your foot won't stumble if you don't do those things Solomon says don't do. If you do them, then trouble's on the way. So that's the security aspect of not withholding help. And then we look at all the way across the chart. You see how that's the security if we will give help when we can. And notice God's response to the right is he's upset with the ones that don't give help, but he's pleased with the ones who do. So now we look at the next block down, and it says, when thou liest down, thou shalt not be afraid. Thou shalt lie down, and thy sleep will be sweet. Well, why is our sleep sweet? Look on your chart. We're going to attach it to the block to the right. Devise not evil against your neighbor. Don't be divisive, and don't be contentious. Now, how can we have that sweet sleep? We haven't done anything to our neighbor. We've done nothing to them, and there's no reason for them to get back at us for what we've done to them. You want sweet peace? Then get along with your neighbor, and there's no reason to feel like he has to get even with you. Now, as we did before, let's look at the whole row across there. You have that sweet sleep because you have not offended your neighbor. And God's response is, if you do get out there and be divisive and contentious, there's trouble coming. But if you get along with your neighbor, then you have peace. It's interesting the way the chart goes together. Now let's look at the next block on your screen. It says, be not afraid of sudden fear, neither of the desolation of the wicked when it cometh. For the Lord shall be your confidence and shall keep your foot from being taken. So there's security. You don't have to fear what might come. Why is that? Well, we're going to attach it to the block next to it like we did before, and we're going to see, don't envy the oppressor. If you don't envy the oppressor and you go on living good and godly, then you don't need to fear what's coming. And we'll attach that to the whole row there, and you see God's response to it. It's beautiful. I think it's absolutely beautiful. So now we have attached all that together, but notice at the bottom it says, fools, they're the ones that are disobedient, and they display dishonor. But the righteous, or the lowly, inherit honor. Notice one more. Fools inherit troubles, but the righteous inherit safety. Do you want security and safety? Well, don't do these things Solomon said don't do. You want blessings? Go back to the previous lesson and do the things that Solomon taught in verses 1 through 12 of chapter 3. These are the blessings that come, and here is the security that comes. Now, this is your choice. As a result, we can rightly deduce two things. One is, wisdom is avoiding these things that Solomon says don't do. And avoiding these things brings real security. So the choice is yours. Will you do it? Interesting, I want to rehearse again. The first half of Proverbs 3 is the blessings that come from doing good. And the second half of Proverbs 3 is the security that comes from not doing evil. Now, chapter 3 is wisdom with the boots on, how to put wisdom into practice. In chapter 2, we saw how to gain a fear of the Lord and find wisdom. In chapter 3, we find out how to put it into practice. In the next lesson, we'll see why we should do these things. Solomon's teaching Rehoboam wisdom, and he wants him to see why. So I hope you'll join me in the next lesson. Remember now, the 4 steps to learning and living the book are in Proverbs 1, but we must acquire and maintain a biblical fear of the Lord in order to accomplish those 4 steps. Then in the next paragraph, there are certain people that we should reject if they try to entice us to join them in sinful activities. If we join them, then we cannot say that we have a biblical fear of the Lord, and we can't accomplish the 4 steps. In the last paragraph of chapter 1, if we reject wisdom, then we've just nullified everything we've tried to do with those 4 steps. Then in chapter 2, we learn how to acquire wisdom. And in chapter 3, we learn how to put it into practice. Isn't this beautiful? I love it. Again, each section builds on the one to follow. So follow along as we go in lesson 4, and I hope I'll see you there. Thank you.